My name is Anna Whitmore, and to the outside world I lived the life most people dreamed of, born into wealth, surrounded by luxury, and part of one of New York's most influential families. The Whitmores were synonymous with success, power, and impeccable reputation. Our name opened doors, and our presence commanded respect. Yet beneath the glittering surface of gala events, sprawling estates, and socialite smiles, there was a world most didn't seek, a world of secrets, lies, and shadows. For years I convinced myself that our family was different, that the bonds we shared were unbreakable. But as I'm learning now, even the strongest illusions can shatter with one crack. It all began on a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind that paints the city in hues of gold and scarlet. The Whitmore estate was alive with the usual bustle of preparations for the upcoming charity ball, an event that would bring together the city's elite under sparkling chandeliers and whispered deals. I was in my father's study, ostensibly reviewing documents for the family's philanthropic foundation. The room smelled of aged leather and polished wood, its walls lined with books and photographs capturing decades of Whitmore legacy. As I sifted through papers, I noticed a faint glimmer of light from under the door leading to the adjoining office. Curiosity tugged at me. I pressed my ear against the cool surface, and what I heard made my heart stop. Two voices, one unmistakably my father's, the other unfamiliar, exchanged words laced with tension and urgency. "I won't let this jeopardize everything we've built," my father said firmly. "But if the board discovers the discrepancies, the entire foundation collapses," the other voice warned. Discrepancies, foundation collapse. The perfect image I had upheld for years was beginning to crumble in mere seconds. Pulling back, I retreated silently, my mind racing. The cracks in our family's flawless reputation were deeper than I had imagined. The days that followed were a whirlwind of suspicion and doubt. I watched my father more closely, his late-night calls, the closed meetings behind heavy doors, the subtle yet constant tension that clung to him like a second skin. My mother, always the graceful hostess, remained an enigma. Her serene smile masked worry lines that deepened each day, and my older brother Ethan seemed unusually distant, his usual charm replaced by a guarded demeanour. One evening at the very ball where our family was meant to shine, I found myself standing alone on the balcony, the city lights twinkling beneath me like stars scattered across the earth. The laughter and music inside felt distant, almost hollow. A whispered conversation between two guests drifted past words about financial mismanagement and internal betrayals. I clenched my fists, the weight of the truth settling heavy on my shoulders. That night, I vowed to uncover the reality behind the Whitmore facade, no matter the cost, because sometimes the perfect illusion is the most dangerous trap of all. The morning after the charity ball, the Whitmore estate felt strangely different, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable to surface. I woke early, the weight of the previous night's whispers pressing down on me like a storm cloud ready to burst. Determined to uncover the truth, I began paying closer attention to the subtle signs that had always been there but I had chosen to ignore. My father's hurried phone calls in the study, the guarded expressions he wore like armour, and the fleeting glances exchanged with my mother behind closed doors. Even Ethan's behaviour was shifting. The brother who had once been my confidant now avoided my questions, his smiles forced and distant. One afternoon, as I waited for a meeting in the family's office wing, I overheard a conversation between my father and a man I had never seen before. Their voices were low but urgent. "We can't afford any mistakes, Richard," the man warned. "If the board suspects everything collapses." Richard's reply was grim. "I've managed this before. We'll keep it under wraps." The phrase "keep it under wraps" echoed in my mind long after they parted ways. That evening I confronted my mother, hoping for clarity, but Evelyn was evasive, her eyes flickering with unease. "Some things are better left alone, Anna," she said softly. "Our family has made sacrifices to protect what matters." Her words meant to soothe only deepened my resolve. I was no longer willing to be a silent participant in a charade. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I reached out to an old friend from university, Liam, a journalist with a reputation for uncovering the truth no matter how deeply it was buried. Over coffee in a quiet cafe, I shared my suspicions and fears. Liam listened intently, eyes sharp. "This isn't just family drama, Anna," he said. "You're dealing with something much bigger. Powerful people with everything to lose." His warning was both a caution and a call to action. As days turned into weeks, the shadows within my family grew darker. Secret meetings multiplied, financial records vanished or were altered, and trusted advisors began to distance themselves. Yet amidst the growing unease, I found an unexpected ally in Ethan. One night he approached me quietly. "I don't agree with what's happening," he confessed, "but if we're going to face this, we need to be smart." Together we began to piece together fragments of the truth, navigating a maze of deception and betrayal that threatened to consume us all. The Whitmore family's perfect image was fracturing, and the shadows that once lurked beneath were now creeping into the light. The deeper Ethan and I delved into the murky depths of our family's dealings, the more apparent it became that betrayal was not a single thread but a tangled web woven throughout every corner of the Whitmore legacy. Late one evening, in the dim glow of my study, Ethan handed me a folder thick with photocopied bank statements, confidential emails and cryptic memos, all pointing to an intricate scheme of embezzlement, bribery, and manipulation. "Dad's been siphoning money from the foundation for years," Ethan whispered, anger and disbelief mixing in his voice. "And it's not just him. Mum's been covering for him, and worse, Victoria knows everything." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Victoria, my sister, the shining star of the family, the one who had always seemed untouchable and above reproach. But beneath her polished exterior lay a cold, calculating accomplice. Determined to understand the full scope of the betrayal, I confronted Victoria under the guise of sisterly concern. She met my gaze with a chilling smile. "You think you're so clever, Anna, but you don't know the stakes." "I know enough," I said firmly. "You're complicit. You've helped destroy our family from within." Her laugh was hollow. "Destroy no, dear sister, we're protecting what's ours. Sometimes that means sacrifices, including you." The words were poison. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the battle was no longer just against my parents. It was a war against my own blood. But I was no stranger to fighting, and I wasn't about to lose. The Whitmore estate had become a battleground not just of power and money, but of trust and loyalty shattered beyond repair. Each day brought new revelations and with them new dangers. My attempts to confront my parents were met with cold deflections and veiled threats. Evelyn's eyes, once warm and nurturing, now held a steely resolve. Richard's charm had given way to something darker, a man willing to sacrifice anything to protect his empire. Victoria's game was more subtle, but no less dangerous. She moved like a shadow, manipulating allies and enemies alike, always 2 steps ahead. One evening, I found myself alone in the library, piecing together intercepted emails and hidden ledgers. The web of deceit was vast and intricate, a network of false accounts, offshore holdings, and bribed officials. I was no longer just uncovering a family secret, I was exposing a criminal enterprise. The walls around me seemed to close in. Whispers followed me through the halls, and once friendly faces turned cold. Ethan and I knew we were treading on thin ice, but retreat was not an option. Together, we began to strategize carefully, choosing who to trust and how to gather the evidence needed to bring the truth to light. But the deeper we dug, the more we realized the real enemy wasn't just within the family, it was the system that allowed such corruption to thrive. Our fight was bigger than any of us imagined. Months of deception, betrayal, and secret investigations had worn me down. The constant tension inside the Whitmore estate was suffocating. But I knew that staying silent meant complicity, and I refused to be part of the web of lies any longer. One evening, after a dinner thick with unspoken accusations, I found myself standing alone in the grand hallway, heart pounding. The weight of the family's sins pressed down on me, but so did a fierce determination. I made my decision. The next morning I called a family meeting, the first in years, where we would face each other without pretense. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Richard's eyes flashed with anger, Evelyn looked resigned, and Victoria's smile was cold, unreadable. I stood before them, voice steady but charged with emotion. "I know everything I began, the money, the lies, the betrayal. This ends now. For a moment, silence reigned, then chaos erupted. Words were hurled, accusations traded like daggers. My family, once my sanctuary, was now a battlefield. But amid the fury, I felt a strange clarity. This was the breaking point, the moment where the past could no longer dictate our future. I was ready to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The silence of the night in my apartment was deceptive. To anyone else, it might have seemed peaceful, the soft hum of the city, the gentle sway of curtains in the breeze. But inside my mind, a storm raged relentlessly. I sat hunched over the desk, illuminated by the harsh glow of the desk lamp. Piles of papers surrounded me, financial reports, email printouts, witness testimonies, photographs, every piece a fragment of the puzzle I was determined to solve. With Ethan beside me, we mapped out the battlefield. Each connection, each hidden transaction, each whispered lie was a thread in the intricate tapestry of deceit that had held our family captive for years. "We need to be smart," Ethan said, rubbing his tired eyes. "If they catch wind of our moves too soon, they'll bury everything again." His words echoed my own fears. The Whitmore family was no ordinary enemy. They had wealth, power, and a network that reached deep into every corner of the city. But we had something they underestimated: the truth. Over the next few weeks, our days blurred into nights as we plotted every step with precision. We started by identifying weak points within the family's inner circle. Those dissatisfied with Richard's leadership, those quietly questioning the ethics of their involvement. I reached out to an old friend from law school, Claire, now a seasoned attorney known for her integrity and fierce dedication. Sitting in a discreet cafe, I laid out the evidence and the stakes. "This isn't just a family feud," Claire said, her gaze steady. "It's a battle against a system designed to protect the corrupt. You'll need more than evidence. You'll need allies, protection, and a strategy that can withstand retaliation." Her words struck a chord. I knew the path ahead would be treacherous. At the same time, Marcus, our private investigator, was digging into financial records and tracking suspicious movements. One evening, he burst into my apartment, breathless. "I found something a shell company tied to your father's accounts. They're funneling money offshore, hidden behind layers of false names." I leaned forward, adrenaline surging. "Can you get proof?" "I'm on it, but be careful, they're watching." That warning was a stark reminder every move we made was a risk. The walls had ears, and the shadows had eyes. Still I pressed on. This was more than revenge. It was reclaiming my life, my family's honor, and the truth that had been buried for too long. The betrayal had been bitter, but the revelation that someone close to me was an enemy in disguise cut deeper than I ever expected. It started with a whisper, a tip from an anonymous source that a trusted family friend, someone I had confided in and believed was on my side, was secretly working against me. At first I refused to believe it. The thought was unbearable. But the shadows of doubt grew heavier each day, and the evidence piled up. Late one night, Marcus handed me a folder thick with intercepted messages, private emails, phone records, even recorded conversations. The truth was undeniable. This friend had been feeding information back to my father and sister, sabotaging my efforts from within. I felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me adrift in a sea of deceit. The next day, I arranged to meet this person in a secluded cafe, the cold air outside matching the chill in my bones. When they arrived, their smile was warm, but their eyes held a calculating glint. I looked them in the eye and said, "Why?" They leaned in, voice low. "You don't understand what's at stake. Loyalty isn't always about honesty, sometimes it's survival." The words echoed a harsh reality, and this family trust was a luxury no one could afford. From that moment, I vowed to trust no one but myself. The enemy within was the most dangerous of all. Days turned into restless nights as the truth settled like a poison in my veins. The friend I once considered an ally had become the most insidious threat, a silent dagger lurking in the shadows of my life. Every conversation, every interaction now carried an undercurrent of suspicion. I found myself second-guessing every move, wondering which confidences had been twisted and reported back to Richard and Victoria. The very fabric of my world was unravelling thread by thread. Marcus was relentless in his investigations, uncovering layers of deception that extended far beyond what I had imagined. Not only was this friend betraying me, but they were also manipulating board members, leaking false information to discredit me and orchestrating whispers that threatened to isolate me further. One evening, Marcus arrived at my door with urgency etched across his face. "We've traced a series of financial transactions linked directly to your friend," he said grimly. "They're funneling money to shell companies, laundering funds and sabotaging your credibility." My heart sank. The betrayal was deeper, more complex and more dangerous than I had feared. I realized I couldn't fight this battle alone, not just against my family, but against the very people I once trusted. I began to build a tighter circle, surrounding myself only with those whose loyalty was proven beyond doubt. Every alliance was scrutinized, every gesture analyzed. The enemy within was no longer just a threat to my family's empire, it was a threat to my very soul. And I would have to be smarter, stronger, and more relentless than ever before to survive. With each passing day, the weight of betrayal pressed heavier, but it also fueled a growing fire within me. I refused to be crushed beneath the lies and manipulations that threatened to consume my life. Every piece of evidence Marcus uncovered was a stepping stone toward reclaiming control. I began documenting everything meticulously: conversations, financial trails, even the smallest discrepancies. The web of deceit was vast, but so was my resolve to untangle it. One rainy afternoon, I confronted the betrayer in a secluded park, the grey skies mirroring the cold reality between us. "You played me," I said, voice steady but filled with hurt. "Why?" They looked away, unable to meet my gaze. In this family, loyalty is survival. I did what I had to. Their words were a harsh reminder of the ruthless world I was fighting against. That day marked a turning point. I was no longer just fighting external battles, but the very essence of trust and betrayal within. The enemy within had been exposed, but the war was far from over. The ground beneath the Whitmore empire began to tremble, and soon it would crumble under the weight of its own secrets. The meticulous web of lies and power that had shielded the family for decades was unraveling, exposing fractures that no amount of wealth or influence could mend. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. Whispers among board members turned to questions. Discreet inquiries evolved into formal investigations. The city's elite, once loyal to Richard Whitmore's name, began to distance themselves, wary of the growing storm. In the glass towers, where deals were once sealed with smiles and handshakes, tensions simmered. The foundation's funding was frozen pending audits. Partners reconsidered alliances. Media outlets sniffed out the scent of scandal. At home, the atmosphere was suffocating. The estate that had always been a symbol of power felt more like a prison. Evelyn's graceful composure gave way to fragile silences and stolen moments of tears. Richard's unyielding facade cracked, revealing a man haunted by the inevitability of his downfall. Victoria's poised mask fractured her desperation, barely concealed beneath layers of calculated charm. One evening I found myself in the grand hallway, overhearing a heated exchange between my parents. The words sharp, bitter confirmed the collapse was imminent. "You should have controlled this, Richard Evelyn," hissed voice trembling. "We're losing everything." His bitter laugh was hollow. "Control is an illusion. The empire we built is falling apart, and there's nothing I can do." The family that once ruled with an iron grip was unraveling, and I was at the heart of it all. But amidst the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. The destruction was painful, but necessary, a reckoning long overdue. I steeled myself for the battles yet to come, knowing that the collapse was only the beginning of a journey toward truth and redemption. The aftermath of the collapse was a quiet storm, the kind that leaves everything scorched but fertile for new growth. The Whitmore name, once synonymous with prestige, was now a whispered, cautionary tale. Boardrooms emptied, lawsuits piled high, and the relentless glare of the media left no corner untouched. Yet, amid the ruins, I discovered something unexpected: freedom. Without the weight of a pretense, I was no longer bound by the chains of secrecy and false loyalty. With each step away from the wreckage, I reclaimed pieces of myself I had long buried beneath expectations and fear. Ethan stood beside me, his presence a steady anchor as we navigated the uncertain waters of rebuilding. Together, we reached out to those who believed in justice and transparency, forging new alliances based on trust rather than convenience. The city skyline, once a symbol of our dominance, now represented endless possibilities, a canvas waiting to be painted anew. But rising from the ashes was not without its challenges. Every victory was tempered by reminders of the past scars that refused to fade. Yet with resilience born from pain, I stepped forward ready to write a new story, one defined not by legacy, but by truth and strength. The tension in the conference room was almost suffocating. The usual hum of activity was replaced by a heavy silence broken only by the faint rustling of papers and the low murmur of restrained voices. It was here, in this glass-walled chamber overlooking the city skyline, that the final battle would be fought not with fists, but with truth. I stood at the head of the table, dossier in hand, the culmination of months of relentless pursuit and painstaking investigation. Each page was a weapon, each photograph and ledger an undeniable proof of the rot that had eaten away at the Whitmore empire. Across from me sat my father, Richard, his face a mask of controlled fury and thinly veiled fear. Beside him, Victoria maintained her usual poise, but the tight grip on her pen betrayed the tension simmering beneath. The board members, once his staunch supporters, exchanged glances, unease flickering in their eyes as the evidence was laid bare before them. I began methodically presenting financial records detailing the embezzlement, revealing forged documents and offshore accounts. I introduced testimonies from former employees and insiders who spoke of intimidation and cover-ups. Each revelation landed like a hammer strike, chipping away at the carefully constructed facade. Richard's jaw clenched at his eyes, never leaving mine. "This is slander!" he finally spat, voice cold and sharp. "Fabricated accusations meant to destroy the family name." I met his gaze steadily. "The truth is no fabrication, and the time for lies is over." As the evidence mounted, whispers rippled through the room. The once unshakable foundation of power began to tremble. Then, in a moment that felt suspended in time, Victoria's composure cracked. Her voice, usually steady and commanding, faltered as she was confronted with her own role in the deception. The room erupted into chaos, accusations, denials, and desperate attempts to salvage a crumbling legacy. Amid the storm, I stood firm, knowing that this was not just a victory for myself, but for truth and justice. As the heated exchanges settled into a tense silence, I took a moment to observe the faces around me. The boardroom, once a temple of power and control, now felt like an arena where empires would fall and futures be rewritten. The weight of what was at stake pressed down on everyone present. I continued with the next phase of my presentation, a series of encrypted communications, secret meetings, and illicit transactions meticulously documented over months. Each detail was precise, leaving little room for denial or obfuscation. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged quick, guarded glances. It was clear that the fortress of loyalty my father had built was cracking its walls, weakened from within. Richard's eyes darkened, and for a moment his mask slipped. "You think you can destroy me? You think this is the end? You're wrong, Anna." But I was no longer the naive daughter who once believed in family above all. I was a force to be reckoned with, armed with truth and driven by justice. "Maybe it's not the end," I replied evenly, "but it's the beginning of accountability." Victoria stood abruptly, her voice trembling with fury and desperation. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart." I met her glare, unflinching. "No, you did that years ago." The room buzzed with tension, the line between family and adversary blurred beyond recognition. As the final pieces of evidence were laid bare, the board voted a decisive move to remove Richard from his position, suspend Victoria's influence, and open a full investigation into the Foundation's activities. The verdict was clear. The Whitmore Empire, as it had been known, was finished, and I'd won the final game. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and merciless. Months of turmoil and investigation culminated in a space where the truth was no longer whispered but declared aloud. Every eye was fixed on Richard Whitmore, once a titan of industry, now a man stripped bare before the world. The charges fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, no longer rumours but facts etched into legal record. The press circled like vultures, hungry for every detail, every crack in the once pristine Whitmore legacy. Victoria's fall was equally swift, her role exposed, influence erased. Even Evelyn, the family's matriarch, faded into the shadows, her silence speaking volumes. For me, the victory was bittersweet. The family I had known, or thought I had, was gone. In its place was a new reality forged in pain. Sacrifice and unyielding resolve. Friends and strangers alike offered support, reminding me that blood ties could be broken, but chosen bonds defined us. I began rebuilding not just my life, but the legacy I wanted to leave, one grounded in truth, resilience, and hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years it felt truly mine. The dawn light filtered gently through the curtains of my new apartment, casting warm hues over the city skyline. It was a far cry from the cold marble halls and suffocating secrets of the Whitmore estate. Standing by the window, I watched as the city stirred awake, alive with endless possibilities. For the first time in what felt like forever, I embraced the future, not with fear, but with hope. The scars of betrayal remained etched, deep reminders of the battles fought and lessons learned. But they no longer defined me. Instead, they became symbols of strength, resilience, and renewal. I had shed the chains of the past, reclaimed my identity beyond the shadows of family and legacy. The people who stood by me, loyal friends, new allies, were my true family now. As I stepped forward into the unknown, I carried with me the knowledge that every ending is but a new beginning. Sometimes the darkest nights give way to the brightest dawns, and this was my new horizon.